Thank you so much for coming today. We are very pleased to have you here, and we're also, of course, even more pleased to have our distinguished speaker today, Professor Achcar. I'm Katarzyna Sislik, and I'm the convener of the lecture series. And today's lecture is doubly special. Not only do we have a distinguished speaker, we also have this lecture organized by our Students for Palestine group, who have been extremely active in organizing events, awareness raising, campaigning, and all kinds of activities, which we very much admire and are proud of. So the session will take around 45 minutes to an hour of lecturing, and then we're going to have time for a discussion, unless you would like the audience to be interrupting you with questions as you speak.
I think it's safer to...
Okay, so we have about an hour and a half for the session, and I'm just going to ask Mahtab to introduce the speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. I think we have some more. Thank you so much for making time and joining us for this lecture. So my name is Mahtab-Uddin. I'm a PhD student at the GDI, and I'm also the chair of the GDI Student for Palestine. We're a student group. We are registered with the Students' Union at the University of Manchester. We arrange lectures, seminars, and recently we organized a conference on the October 17th on Palestine and social justice. It's our honor to have Professor Gilbert with us for this lecture today. Professor Gilbert is a professor of development studies and international relations at SOAS University of London. He has degrees in philosophy, social sciences, and a PhD in social history, international relations. Before joining SOAS in 2007, he taught and researched in various universities and research centers in Beirut, Berlin, and Paris. Professor Gilbert has many books published in a total of 20 languages, so we are very proud to have you here. And after this book talk, he has a book launching event, book talk. After this lecture, he has a book talk in the Blackwells at 7 p.m. So, Professor Gilbert, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the invitation, opportunity to meet you. Well, I think it's also a reflection of the events. 15 years ago, we would have had a meeting on this topic. The room would have been full, and people lost interest in what is happening in the region. At the same time, of course, the attention shifted from that to the genocide that has been going on for the last couple of years in Gaza. So fortunately, there is after this one, there's a 7 in the bookshop here, opportunity to speak of Gaza and of Palestine. Of course, now my topic, I stick to the announced topic, which is the title that is here and the one that you saw in the announcement. Right. And, the question is how to assess this succession of events that the Middle East and North Africa, that's the Arab-speaking region, has gone through over those last 15 years. And if you think of it, this is a very exceptional sequence of events. In 2011, was called the Arab Spring, you had a real revolutionary shockwave that shook the whole region. Practically with the exception of very artificial states like the United Arab Emirates and Qatar, where those having the local citizenship are 10% of the population and 90% of expats or migrants. With the exception of these, not a single country was not affected by the revolutionary shockwave, at least at the very least in the form of the rise of political and social protest. But 6 countries of the region, 6 in the same year, went into uprising mode, into major uprisings. Started in Tunisia, to Egypt, then Libya, Yemen, Bahrain, and Syria. So six of the region's countries. And that was a first wave, which was actually defeated basically within a couple of years. That is, by 2013, it was basically defeated after 2013. Then in 2019, you have a second wave, and this time 4 countries had uprisings: Sudan, Algeria, Iraq, and Lebanon. So you have a total of 10 countries. That is almost half of the countries of this geopolitical area called Middle East and North Africa, and more than half the populations. So that's absolutely amazing. Just think of the same at the level of Europe. You have to go back maybe to the aftermath of the First World War to see that kind of revolutionary shockwave spreading over a whole region. So the question is why? Of course, you have this. It's not. It can't be a political. I mean, of course, uprisings are political events, but the underlying cause of all that can't be political, because you have very different political conditions between the countries that I mentioned. So it's not a matter of political explanation. There must be something else. And here, well, at least here, I'm speaking to those who are in development studies among you. Sorry. Yeah, that's much better. Thank you. Thank you. Right. What happened?
If you just move the mouse there.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, as someone in political economy or development studies or whatever, the normal reaction to such events would be to investigate the root causes in social economic factors that affect the region, and if there are any common factors, because what you're doing it's a matter of Sherlock Holmes kind of logic. You're trying to find a common denominator, a common factor between all these countries that might explain those uprisings, those chains of uprising. And indeed, if we consider that as part of the global south, although some of the countries, those I mentioned, United Arab Emirates or Qatar, are among the rich countries, so they are countries with absolutely huge inequality between a bunch of very rich people and 10% of citizenry that were privileged, and then migrants or expats. Even the terms used differ on depending on the kind of salary and condition they have. But I mean, if we look at the rest, Egypt, Syria, Morocco, and the rest, of course, they are very classically countries of the global south, having those features of the global south, and that's the case of the majority of the countries, therefore, in the region. And so, I mean, what you could examine is a triptych of as I call it, of poverty, inequality, and precarity. And if we look at these three conditions, starting with poverty, well, you can see here that the Middle East and North Africa is this green section. So what strikes you is the reduction, the massive reduction of the number of people living in extreme poverty in South Asia and East Asia, well, that's China and India, where you had this. That's of course, but and since the uprisings started in 2011, if you look at it here at this level, you see that this Middle East and North Africa, I mean, this is Sub-Saharan Africa, the blue one. You see that Middle East and North Africa is not characterized by great poverty compared to South Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa in particular, or even to what East Asia is. But what is striking, if you look at that, is the fact that it's stagnating. You see that this level of poverty doesn't change practically. It's the same from 1990 to 2025. And there you have a major clue to which we will be getting back. Quickly about the other things, inequality, there are no reliable figures about inequality in the region. There are some official statistics, but they are unreliable in the sense that they are made, or when they are a little bit scientific, they follow models that do not reflect the real range of social problems, and especially inequality. I mean, income is not something that you can. There are no real figures on income in the region. But of course, it is obvious to any observer and in general figures that this is one of the most unequal regions in the world, probably the most, if we take it as a region, the most unequal, as you could see from these figures in red, and that, indeed, as it is said here, perceptions of this inequality, most probably, or even one could even say certainly, played a role in the frustration that exists in the region. Now, precarity, about precariousness. Here you see, again, like for poverty, this is not the most precarious part of the world. I mean, Sub-Saharan Africa or South Asia have higher rates of informal employment. So, although, of course, you have it in the Middle East and North Africa, but there are parts of the world where this is worse. So, that's not, again, the single factor that we could see as really characterizing the region and the region as a whole, and explaining this singularity of such waves of uprising. Now, if we look at unemployment, then we find something that is very striking, is the fact that this is a part of the world with the highest rates of youth unemployment. And it's been like this. Here you have it over practically since the start, the turn of this century. But actually, it's been going on like this for several decades. If you see, this is starting in 95. You see where the Middle East and North Africa are starting way above the rest of the regions of the world. Now, for those who are not familiar with these issues, unemployment is measured on the basis of people who are seeking a job, who declare that they're seeking a job, and that explain why in poorest societies, this might be paradoxical, but it's not. You may have higher unemployment. You may have lesser unemployment than in richer societies, because in order to be unemployed, you first of all you need to afford to be unemployed, in the sense that you have some conditions that allow you to be seeking a job and waiting to find a job in order to work. And that explains for sure why this youth unemployment in particular can be much higher in North Africa and the Middle East than it is in sub-Saharan Africa or South Asia for that matter. So it is a reflection of what we saw at the beginning, the poverty thing. That is, this is a region which is better off than those other regions. But yet, the fact that you have such a huge youth unemployment is, of course, a source of very deep frustration. And a more specific source than the issue of inequality. And here we touch upon a major factor in that regard. And when we take a closer look at this unemployment, we see that it is disproportionately an unemployment of graduates. And as this ILO, International Labour Organization report put it quite well, educational attainment actually increases the risk of joblessness. Well, no, I said that they put it quite well. Actually, if you think of it, it's not educational attainment that increases the risk, but educational attainment indicates that you are in a social position where you would want some type of work or some level of work, short of which you will keep looking for work. You won't take anything. That's the difference between very poor societies. As I said, you have to, afford to be unemployed and not be obliged to go sell bottles of water or tissues at traffic lights, for instance, or in trains or whatever, as you have in so many countries, including in these countries, but the proportions are different. So these factors combined, especially this youth unemployment, and within this youth unemployment, the graduate youth unemployment, these are key factors in explaining the explosion, especially that young people, of course, when you say uprising, you're not speaking of people of my generation or no longer. You're speaking of young people, and that's what most of those who are mobilizing those uprising are. And so that's definitely is a major clue to, and the translation is in that. This is just before 2011. And you can see, where the youth are most frustrated. The first country that comes here in this is Tunisia, where all started. Where you had 44% of young people saying they want to leave the country, and they find it hopeless. They believe that they should go. Also, Morocco, Algeria, I mean, Egypt, 20%, which is a very high proportion anyway, but it's a much bigger country, of course, than Tunisia, and with a much bigger rural population. So, but still, you have quite high proportions, and if you see what happened with that over those 15 years, you see that it's just increasing. So now, I mean, if you put aside those Gulf countries where those who are migrants there don't want to migrate, and the locals have no incentive to migrate because they have a lot of privileges, the nationals. But if you take North Africa and the Middle East, you see that you have close to 50% of the young people saying they want to leave, they want to migrate. So this is a huge level of frustration. And this huge level of frustration is the key, and which has accumulated, as I said, over decades before 2011, is what exploded in 2011 and is still exploding, as we shall see. There is also a gender dimension to this unemployment and to general condition of women in the region, with a very low rate of labor, participation in the labor force. It is the lowest in the world, and the highest disparity, the highest rate of female unemployment compared to male unemployment. So on both levels, women in the region are very much disadvantaged, and when they can express themselves, they will be very much part of those. All the uprisings of 2011, 2019, as long as they were non-violent. When it turns violent, things change completely. But when they were mass uprisings, they were characterized by a significant participation of women, including in a country where the condition of women is seclusion, generally, like Yemen. Okay, so now and here, if we think of this high rate of female unemployment, keeping in mind what I said about unemployment, we have again a clue to the cause of all this, and it is in the fact that what here is called a slowdown in the growth of public sector employment. The fact that you've had this global push towards shrinking the public sector to the benefit of the private sector, and that happened globally with is called neoliberalism since the 90s, in particular, when it accelerated at the global level. This had direct effect on female unemployment in diminishing the job outlets that were attractive to women, where you had what are called the reservation conditions. That is, certain conditions. Those sectors where women find it okay to work. There are some sectors where you have, for cultural reasons, where women wouldn't go. So usually sectors which are public sectors, large public sectors of health and education, are where women would go, and the shrinking of employment at the general level of also the administration is what explained this decline in rise, therefore, female decline in jobs and rise in female unemployment. And we'll see how all these issues are connected finally with the clues that we found. Because if you have unemployment, if you carry on trying to find a la Sherlock Holmes, unemployment means that your economy is not producing jobs. That means there is a problem of even of growth in the very basic sense of the term, and that's what you would examine next to the unemployment. And if we take a look at the decades that preceded the explosion of 2011, we see indeed that the Middle East and North Africa here in the middle, in terms of annual growth rate of GDP, the gross domestic product per capita, that therefore takes into account the demography, had been even in the 70s and 80s has been negative. That is, the demography was faster than the economic growth. And then in the next 2 decades, it was at half the rate, the average rate of developing countries, exactly the half, and way below East Asia, of course, China in particular, but also other East Asian countries, which are much faster development than the Middle East and North Africa, and even South Asia. So there is a problem of growth, and that is what translated in unemployment. Now, if we try to see if maybe that's just a matter of demography, and we look at this factor, we see that in the 70s and 80s, it was higher. I mean, the population growth rate in the Middle East and North Africa was the highest of all regions of the world. But, I mean, you can see here that it's not substantially higher than that of Sub-Saharan Africa. And then in the next 2 decades, before the explosion of 2011, it went actually down quite sharply. It was lower than Sub-Saharan Africa and practically close to South Asia. So that does not explain this. There is a clear disparity. So the problem here is not demography. The problem is something else. And what is the something else? Again, here, carry on. If you don't have growth, all that, then the next factor you will examine is investment, right? And this is confirmed by the general pattern of this growth now until more recently. You can see that the Middle East and North Africa, which is in blue, has had quite lower rates of growth up to now. I mean, even with a widening gap after the 2011 period with South Asia and East Asia. So that factor, that specific low rate of growth has continued. It's been there for a long time. This is starting from 1990. So, investment. Here, as a percentage of GDP, well, you have it here. You see that the rate of investment in the Middle East and North Africa is way below those of South Asia and East Asia, right? And therefore, that's the reason why the region is lagging behind in terms of rates of growth. There's no mystery here. It's clear. Lesser rate of investment and therefore lesser rate of growth. And at the time, this basic research I did is to be found in a book I wrote right after the Arab Spring, as it was called, and it came out 2013. The title is "The People Want: A Radical Exploration of the Arab Uprising." It came out in a second edition 3 years ago, 2022. So the basic analysis is there, but these are some more recent figures just confirming what could be what was said from the beginning about all this. But at the time of the book, I tried to find figures, comparative figures, where I could compare with other with East Asia and South Asia. And for the years before, and the period for which I have figures was the period 95 to 2007, because I wanted to examine the next question. We found it's a matter of investment. Then the next question is it public investment or private investment that is different? And here we see that in terms of public, without the GCC, where the economic conditions of the countries are quite different, the Gulf cooperation countries. But you see that public sector, what is striking is first that East Asia has, of course, a much higher rate of public investment than other parts of the world. And that's actually belies the neoliberal myth of the fact that the private sector is the key to everything. Actually, China, of course, and other East Asian countries have had a lot of state intervention in the economy, which is the key factor for the speed of their economic development. The Middle East and North Africa is here, and it is quite low compared to other. Now, you could say, and you'll see here, that South Asia has even less. But if we look at the private sector, you see that South Asia had a private sector. It's closer to the neoliberal perspective. India, for instance, is that case, because here the private sector has been the dominant in the in investment. Now, what you see here is East Asia went up here. These are years of crisis. That's why you had this big financial crisis in East Asia. That's why it went down. But otherwise, it is also more than in the Middle East and North Africa. So the problem here is the Middle East and North Africa, where you have low public investment and low private investment. Private investment that hasn't compensated for public investment. And so that points to a basic problem with the neoliberal perspective, which was shrink the state, shrink the public sector, privatize, let the private sector be the driving engine of the economy, and you will see miracles. They didn't. they didn't happen, and we'll get now to the reason for that. And this reason is rooted in the specific type of economies and states that you have in the region. This peculiar capitalism of the region. There are a number of features that are characteristic of the region. First of all, the fact that this is a region with probably the highest density in the world of frontier states. This is states that of which a significant part of the income comes from either natural resources or even strategic locations, and therefore being paid for that, or whatever activities that are not a direct product of labor. So you have a high proportion of frontier states. Of course, the most obvious one is everything linked to the fossil fuels, to hydrocarbons, oil and gas, the rest. But as I said, you have strategic, like a country like Jordan or Egypt, for instance, are subsidized by the global system, by the United States, by local Gulf countries for their strategic role, for their military role. So that's part of it. You have other also natural resources, but as a whole, the key point is this high concentration, especially of plainly frontier states in hydrocarbons, Algeria, Libya, the Gulf countries, even Syria has some. Iraq, of course, is a major producer. So you have it all over the region. Egypt exports gas. So you have plus the Suez Canal. That's another source of rent. So that's one feature. The second feature is that this is a region which is also characterized by a number of patrimonial states. What does it mean? That is a reference to states which are unlike the modern state, where you have separation between the state institutions and the rulers. The rulers are there, between two elections or whatever. They don't own the state. Patrimonial states are more like absolutist states of the past, where you have a ruling group, a ruling family that owns the state, that regard the state as its private ownership. Generally speaking, about the global south, the category that is used is neo-patrimonial. That is those states where you have some degree of separation. You have elections and change of personnel that happen, but you have very high nepotism and cronyism. And these are called, in the jargon of political science, neo-patrimonial state. Now, of course, the region, Middle East and North Africa, is one where you have neo-patrimonial state, but what is specific is that you have what is worse than a patrimonial state. You have fully patrimonial states. And these are the monarchies. You have 8 of them, which are quite traditional monarchies where the ruling family owns, regard the state as its private ownership. And you even had so-called republics. This happened with the ruling families in the same. The Assad family in Syria, had Saddam Hussein not been overthrown by the United States in 2003. One of his sons would have inherited power from him. And the same goes for Gaddafi. So Libya, Iraq, Syria are also similar to those monarchies, patrimonial state. And this hardcore of fully patrimonial states affects the rest and makes the whole region very much determined by two factors, and this is what is peculiar. I mean, what is specific to the capitalism of the region. It is a politically determined capitalism. It is determined by relation to power, to political power. It's not the market that rules, if you want. It's the connection. And so cronism, nepotism, and the rest are very widespread. It is also a politically determined capitalism in the sense that the region is one of the most unstable parts of the world in terms of security and wars, and therefore a very high degree of unpredictability. Also unpredictability of the behavior of the rulers, if you're not part of them, okay? If you develop a business which is thriving, then you will expect the ruling family to knock on your door and say, we want a share, if not worse. So these are practices that are coming. So under such conditions, to believe that you just need to shrink the public sector and open it to the private sector and it will be marvelous is just illogical. And that's the matter with the international financial institutions. They are really dogmatic. I mean, you know, that famous joke about the IMF, calling it the international monetarist fundamentalism. It is actually, in some sense, it is fundamentalist in the sense that it is dogmatic, disregarding the peculiar conditions of states. So you have this dogma about the private sector and the rest, which is forced on all countries of the world, regardless of their specific conditions. Now, it might work, it may work in some countries which have some kind of dynamic sector of small and medium enterprises which are open to export and the rest. There are some countries that fit the description. But other parts of the world, and especially this one we are discussing, do not. And that is the reason why, ever since those changes started being implemented they started early on with the dismantlement of the so-called socialist period that preceded in the 1960s. So from the 70s, you had a beginning of dismantlement of those public sectors that accelerated in the 90s. And the result has been this rise of unemployment because of everything that we explained. And therefore leading to the explosion of the region. This is confirmed, if you want, by even this is an enterprise survey by the World Bank and other institutions, just confirming what I've been saying. Is actually that's more recent than the book I wrote about that, but it confirms that political instability, high perceived levels of corruption, political connections. I mean, this is what most of the people in the business sector who don't have these connections complain of, and that's how they explain what the problem is in their view. As you can see, that also, where does money go in such perspective? As I explained here, you would have private capitalism will look for quick profit would go for real estate, also speculation, trade, light investment. And that's what you get now. There's a recent report by the OECD showing what is the logical conclusion that was mentioned before, that you see that foreign investment, and that gives you an indication of local investment also, goes to extractive industries, real estate and construction, as well as light manufacturing. And these are sectors that with low job creation there's far less investment in the kind of industries that such countries would need to have a vigorous economy and a much lesser rate of unemployment. Now, a few words about the uprising. Well, the explosion started in Tunisia, which is not a coincidence we saw because of the high rate of frustration of the youth in that country. But it has another factor that explains why it was the first country in the region where a mass movement managed to overthrow a dictator, a despot, a leader. And that was because of something specific to Tunisia, is the only relatively powerful autonomous labor movement or semi-autonomous labor movement in the region. This was a particularity of Tunisia. They had a strong labor confederation, which played a key role in organizing the uprising once it had started. Now, we find the labor movement playing roles in other countries, in Ukraine, where you had also an important labor movement history, even in Yemen, but we can't say it's generalized, and that's also why, for instance, in Tunisia, you had victory of the movement. In other countries, you had defeats early on. Another factor is the role of Islamic fundamentalist movements. You had the development over the years in this part of the world of Islamic fundamentalist movement, the most important of which is the Muslim Brotherhood, which has branches in all the countries of the region, and which has been, in most cases, in the opposition, often a loyal opposition, a moderate opposition, but they seized the opportunity of the uprisings, and that's another factor. We don't have labor movement. You would have them, or you could have both, like Tunisia, and they managed to bring the uprising to fruition in the sense of overthrowing the existing regime. Now, the dynamics of all that have been quite different according to the nature of the state. In fully patrimonial states, it is just or almost impossible, let's say, to think of a peaceful overthrow of the ruler, because precisely they regard the state, especially the armed forces and the elite forces of the armed forces, as their Praetorian Guard, which is linked to them organically through various means, and therefore you will need to smash this guard of the regime in order to overthrow the regime. And that's why in such states it turns quickly into civil war. Now, the only monarchy in 2011, 2019, where you had a major uprising was Bahrain, but the uprising was subdued by the intervention of the Gulf countries, led by the Saudi Kingdom, which is neighbor of Bahrain. In Libya and in Syria, where you had major uprisings and you had a patrimonial state, you had it turned into a civil war. Whereas if you take Egypt, where you have a neo-patrimonial state, some degree of separation between the ruling family and the institution, and there the most important state institutions, the one that is ruling is the armed forces. When armed forces got rid of Mubarak, the president. So that's what you can't have in a patrimonial, fully patrimonial state, because the armed forces would be organically linked to the ruling family, which is not the case in a country like Egypt or wasn't the case also in Tunisia, and that's the two countries where they managed to get rid of the ruler, followed also by Yemen, which has a more complex kind of situation. So these are differences that explain the different dynamics of all that. As I said at the beginning, you had two big waves, 2011, 2019. There has been a learning curve shifting from one to the other, and the most important thing that people learned was not to repeat the illusions that the mass movement had about the army in Egypt in 2011. So in both Algeria and Sudan, which are the two other countries of the region where the army is ruling, the mass movement, even though you have the same scenario, the military removing the president, the mass movement had no illusions about the military, unlike what happened in Egypt 2011. So there's a learning curve here. Another major difference is that the Islamic fundamentalists who hijacked, say, the movement 2011, were actually this time not in the opposition, but on the other side in 2019. In the four countries Sudan, Algeria, Lebanon, and Iraq, actually Islamic fundamentalist forces were in power or allied with power, and therefore you didn't have, their role was very different than in 2011. And that explains also the fact that you had also a more visible role of women. Now, the issue of organization, like you had in 2011, you had a wide use of social media, Facebook, Twitter, and the rest, and that's what compensated for the lack of physical networks able to lead, except for the Islamic fundamentalists, but the rest, the secular, let's say, forces were much weaker. They have been weakened by years of repression, the exception here was Sudan. It's been Sudan, where you had a really unique combination of some important labor mobilization and a youth movement, which is very exceptional, which has taken the form of kind of horizontal network of youth groups, which mobilized tens of thousands, if not more. There's no specific figure, but it was a very big movement, and they played the role of the spearhead of the uprising in that country, and that was the most promising development there, but then this wave of 2019 faced the COVID pandemic, which played a role in ending the movements in the three countries other than Sudan. And in Sudan, thanks to the role of the youth movement, the movement carried on. But finally, what you have had is that you had a coup trying to stop to end this momentum created by the 2019 uprising. This coup was fought by those young people of the resistance committees, as they were called. But 2 years later, it's the military among themselves that started fighting. And since then, Sudan, as you have certainly heard, is going through a nightmare, another one in the region, with the most acute humanitarian crisis in today's world, and absolutely terrible civil. The last country that had maintained gains from 2011, and they were democratic gains, which was Tunisia, has lost them in 2021. So defeat is general now. But when we get back to what we found from the beginning, which is the deep-rooted structural causes of this frustration, discontent, and explosions, then when we see that nothing of that has been solved, but on the contrary, it has just worsened, then we understand that we are in what I called from the start a long-term revolutionary process. That's something that I insisted upon from the beginning, from 2011, when people were thinking of spring. Even the term spring was something like short-term change that will quickly end and be successful. I insisted on the fact that we entered a long-term revolutionary process that means of ups and downs, revolution, counter-revolution, and the rest. The key point remains in that regard the organizational weakness. I mean, the lack of organization capable of expressing the aspirations of those who rise up, and especially the young people. This had been the key weakness, and yet, and this just as a confirmation of the fact that we're not. This process is going on. Just a few weeks ago, you had a major uprising of the youth in Morocco, part of those Gen Z and Z generation movements that you've had in some countries, which are disconnected. They are known. But here in Morocco, you had one which was inspired by what was happening in Nepal and some other countries. So you have this large movement in Morocco. And when you look at the figures there, you find that, the same problem, the same pattern that we mentioned, youth unemployment, very high rates, almost 36% for the young people, and with a rate reaching close to half in the urban areas, 47%. Close to half of the young people in the urban areas are unemployed. It is people, again, who want a job, who are looking for a job, who are not finding one. And even for the next age group, you still have very high rate of unemployment. And you have a very high rate of graduate unemployment. And gender, also the gender dimension is there. So all the features that we discuss are there. And that explains why. And this process is going on and will be going on as long as you don't have a major change in the region. You will have turmoil, you will have uprisings, you will have explosions, social explosions, and in the absence of positive outcomes, they may turn again and again into tragedies, into civil wars and the rest. But that's how history works. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this, Professor. We will now take questions and comments.
Okay.
Yes, there we go.
Is there a certain sense of pessimism in a sense of I'm half Moroccan, so like from a insider perspective, where, as you said, the region is so like politically determined capitalism that is so entrenched in the dynamics and the social dynamics. Nepotism is almost so natural, or it looks like. Is there actually possibility of change? Like recently in Morocco, with all these uprisings, there was definitely a feeling of hope, but it was like the revolution seemed a bit ephemerous, and it was more on the actual side. It almost feels like they don't like the current state, but they don't know how they live in an other way. They don't like the nepotism of the monarchy, but they cannot conceptualize a Morocco without the monarchy. So is there an actual, I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure they couldn't conceptualize Morocco without the monarchy, except that saying that there has terrible consequences, as you probably know. But they knew what they wanted. They didn't want, well, for instance, they didn't want all this money to be spent on organizing the World Cup and saying education and health are more important. And one of the triggers of that was something that happened in the hospital where several women died because of lack of basic needs at the hospital, maternity. So, but the key point is that with social media, you can mobilize, but you can't change power, you can't take power, right? You can organize demonstrations through Facebook, blah, blah. In Morocco, they went a stage further using games platform, Discord, and that allowed for a very democratic way of functioning, which is remarkable. You had 200,000 people voting on whether they continue or not the movement of this day and that day, right? So you can, with such means, organize rallies, demonstrations, whatever, but you can't seize power. You can't change power. And you can't even translate that into politics, even if we're thinking of electoral politics or whatever. So that's the point. And so this youth that is frustrated and the new generation even more, I mean, those ages are Generation Z, but it was a previous one that was at the center of 2011. We had 15 years since then. They as I said, they lack a political force, organized force, representing their aspirations, which could lead, transform this mass potential, into a tool to change power, to change government, to change the kind of regime, to earn democracy and political freedom and social justice. I mean, these are the demands of this movement in general. So that's the point. Yeah.
There is hope.
Sorry?
There is hope.
Look, I always make a distinction in my writings between optimism and hope. There's no room for optimism in the region. No room for optimism. Anyone optimistic would be just very delusional. And it's not going better. It's getting worse, especially when you look what happened in Palestine and all that, Sudan. What's going on in Syria is not encouraging. Yemen, you had wars everywhere, Libya. So there's no room for optimism, unfortunately. But there's still room for hope in the sense that there is a potential that still exists as we see it now with this Gen Z movement and all that, which comes to the fore every now and then. The issue is, will it find a way to organize politically, or will there be some political forces emerging that represent this? That's a question. So there's a potential, but I wouldn't lie to you and try to sell some sense of optimism. No, unfortunately.
We have a question here and then over here. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. This is just possibly a follow-up on the Moroccan situation and possibly not adding optimism. I completely agree with the difference. Just to add also how striking that case is that in 2016, there was also the Iraq movement in the Rif region, and again, for a case very similar of the case in
2019.
Yeah.
That's part of the wave of 2019.
The frequency is even higher. It's not only it, and that has been extremely brutally repressed, with the leaders who have been jailed almost for life. And now also the repression of the Gen Z movement is again very heavy sentences. So I wouldn't only talk about the lack of proposal from the movement. It's also that there is clearly a repressive hand, despite this very friendly image that Morocco wants to project. So I would really take that into account because it's not even well discussed in the media. But then I also think that even feeds into that experience of frustration and fear, because there's a memory that lingers. Family who now have sons for 20 years, there will be possibly a mercy from the king, but then that remains.
Yeah, no, definitely repression is a key factor in everything, but also the scale, if you want, Morocco's. That's why I didn't call it a new wave or whatever. The Moroccan movement was remarkable, but it was just the youth here, not the whole population, like you had in Sudan in 2019, or even Algeria, or not to mention Egypt, Tunisia, and all these countries of 2011. But that showed this whole potential, that showed the frustration of the young people. Now, overall, yes, the monarchy in Morocco, on the one hand, has some kind of stronger legitimacy in the eyes of a section of the population, especially the rural population, than in other countries. And secondly, it behaved smartly in 2011 and all that. We don't have time to get into the details of this. But at some point, I mean, it can't go on like this forever. I mean, the problems are just accumulating. These levels of youth unemployment are extremely high, and so that's why you have this potential, and which will remain in the region as long as you have those root causes that we described, and means this process will go on, can carry on for long. We have had in history revolutionary processes going on for decades and decades, and especially when you're speaking of a region, not a single country. But the conditions for positive change are those that I mentioned. That is the emergence of some force capable of. That is when you had new governments coming as a result of uprisings. They did not solve in any manner the key question. They actually continued on the neoliberal track, and even worse, they accelerated it in some point. Like, for instance, if you take the Muslim Brotherhood, they have no critical stance on that. They are all for private sector and all that. And therefore, the problems just worsened, and very quickly in some cases. If you take the Tunisia, which was for many years presented as the success story and blah, 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 of all that, I mean, when you have the kind of analysis developed and you look at the fundamentals and you see that they were worsening in Tunisia, then you know that those democratic gains are very fragile. And that's what happened. They were lost. Because the new governments that came after the dictatorship were completely unable, and behind them the International Monetary Fund and Europe, the EU, and putting pressure in the wrong direction when it comes to solving the problems of the country.
Over here and then here. Yeah. What's up? You?
Yeah, thanks. I really like the narrative, and I find it very convincing. You have a small number of workers, so you don't have working class movements. So instead you have unemployed youth. There's this backlash, but they're no match for the military. And then you come to the final slide, and you say, well, in order to really change something, you basically need to seize the state, machinery of state, have a democratic arrangement, and you need strong public sector and so on. But in the absence of something external, it seems like that won't possibly happen. And yet you didn't talk about anything beyond the region. So I wonder if you could just talk a bit about how the world has changed. I mean, we're not in 2011. The US is not the only superpower. Back then it would just do a regime change if it didn't like someone. It still might think it can, but I guess other countries would say it just can't. I mean, we see an emergent China, even regional powers, Turkey. The UAE is not a progressive power, but it has its own agenda, which it didn't probably back then. So I wonder if you can just talk a little bit about how this emergent world order, whatever we want to call it, could change, just change this dynamic that we see in the region internally.
Yeah, first of all, I didn't say that there's no working class or the work. In a country like Egypt, for instance, has a concentrated large working class. Other countries also have, and as I explained, the labor movement played a key role in Tunisia. It had an important role in Bahrain, and we'll say about that. So I didn't
I just thought you meant,
yeah,
because unemployment is so high.
Yeah, no, I mean,
working class.
when you yes, the young people are the spearhead of all that, but you have a more general discontent that would express itself in a major uprising. Today, if you take Egypt, the whole population is confronted with very worsening conditions of living, but the repression is so harsh that it is intimidating and preventing, until now, again, people won't be able to suffer this forever. So at some point, this will have to explode. Now, for the international, it doesn't affect those factors that keep people. I mean, people are not. Even Gaza, even the genocide, led to actually quite little mobilization. Morocco had more than other countries, but overall, that was quite low, especially when you look at previous waves of solidarity with like the Intifada of the 80s. And that's related to some degree of frustration and demoralization after the defeats. They have a demoralizing effect, and repression. Repression has been, I mean, the regimes in the region are have become very sensitive to any kind of movement, fearing that it can start over something and spread into expression of all sorts of discontent, especially social discontent, and that's why they don't let people demonstrate over Gaza or whatever. So you have it, but basically, political factors of this kind played little role in those uprisings. They are mostly social. And when they express themselves politically is in the confrontation with the government, but not a general matter of politics or even less so of international politics. It's more about these issues.
Yeah, thank you so much. So somehow my question is complementary to this question. We are seeing the rise of the far right in the world, and at the same time, I think we are seeing the left actually rethinking its strategy and organizational methods. So how do you think that is going to impact the region? What are the possibilities of actually rebuilding the left in the region?
Well, with such governments, who needs a far right? I mean, there's no far right in the Arab-speaking region, at least, or the Middle East and North Africa, even if you add Iran. There's nothing like the Western far right, or even the, I don't know, the BJP or whatever. There's no mass far right-wing movement. First of all, there are no mass movements. They have the state in control of things. And if there are any, or you had any mass oppositions, they were Islamic rather than nationalist or whatever. Now, after that, you may call, I don't know, those extreme Islamic fundamentalist groups like ISIS. You could see in them something of very far right character, but that doesn't correspond really to the concept of left, right, far right. This is something different.
So you don't think that the global dynamics will impact the region? I mean, definitely in Iran there is a far right allied with Israel and is rising in Iran.
Which far right?
Is a monarchist.
I wouldn't call.
They are really like allied with the global far right. Actually.
Yeah, but I mean, here again, the monarchists are there far right in the sense of Farage and Donald Trump and Narendra Modi, or Bolsonaro or Milei. I'm not sure. They are reactionary for sure because they want to turn the clock back to ancient times. But I'm not sure you would. I mean, the far right, where you have it. I mean, the monarchists are rather the privileged people who would be supportive of or dreaming of the monarchy, not the poorer layers. Whereas, the far right, whether Donald Trump or Farage, they appeal to the popular layers, and that's the problem. That's how they manage to win, especially when they have the Keir Starmers of this world to confront.
Would you say maybe that the fundamentalists behave like the equivalent of the far right in Europe, as in that demagogy?
Yeah, well, they fill that slot. They fill the slot of mass frustration, opposition, and belief in their case is not make America great again, is let's get back to original Islam or to real Islam or the teachings of Islam, and everything will be, well, it's magical thinking anyway. But you could see you could see some parallels, but overall it's different. It remains quite different. And there were people trying who, I mean, you had debates about this in the region, and some people wanted to label these movements, especially when there were mass movements like the Muslim Brotherhood, as fascist. Part of the Egyptian left would call them fascist or draw a parallel with fascism. I don't think it really works. They are not fascist. They are conservative or reactionary religious organizations, but it's not the same as fascism. And when they come to power, as we've seen in Egypt and Tunisia, they haven't. I mean, well, they were quite weak in power anyway, but they haven't developed what you could see was a fascist movement in power.
I believe we are out of time, Mahtab, so I'm going to have to ask you to ask your question during your post-lecture coffee with our speaker. I had 2 questions myself, which I didn't ask. But it is time to thank our speaker. And make this session. Thank you all very much for coming, and I do hope to see you next week at another GDI lecture series event.